LaUra Schmidt. I'm the co-founder of Good Grief Network. It is a global movement to bring people together, to lean into the hard realities of our time and figure out some meaningful action that we can take together. I was supposed to be joined by Amy Lewis-Rowe, but she unfortunately is suffering an endometriosis flare-up and cannot join us. Amy is the other co-founder of Good Grief Network and my wife. Her words have helped craft this talk, and of course, the first part of her words helped craft this talk, and of course, the first part, the breathing exercises, were Amy's influence. So I want to acknowledge that I'm going to talk about some really hard things today, but I'm going to provide some pathways for emotional discharge and greater connectivity. Please arrive with your full self. Be here now with us. You can take one of those long exhale breaths we practice if you feel overwhelmed. You might see me take one or two, and it's because usually I'm up here with Amy, and Amy usually gets nervous, and so she takes all the nerves herself. Since I'm up here solo, I have all the nerves. So some of the things I'm going to say might make you feel some strong reactions. I invite you to notice those reactions. Don't judge them, just notice them, be with them. Okay, let's get real about the severity of the predicament. Years ago, I was at the University of Utah in the Environmental Humanities program. As I came to an awareness of the severity of the predicament, that's where I came to an awareness of the severity of the predicament. My question throughout that time was, what do I do with that knowledge? How do I be a thinking and feeling person, knowing what I know? This is where the foundations of Good Grief started, right at the U. And I had some really great professors who mentored me, and some of whom are no longer in the program. I'm grateful to see that some of them still are. I hold a lot of gratitude for the U, for the EH program, for the sustainability office where I worked, and the larger Salt Lake community. Now it's time to get real about it, as Suzanne Moser, a social science researcher, suggested. James Baldwin once said, "Nothing can be changed until it's faced. So we'll face it today, here, together." The climate emergency, social injustice, income inequality, the destruction of entire ecosystems, political polarization, the sixth mass extinction event, the erosion of our democracy, and the global pandemic are just a few of the many overlapping crises we're facing right now. I believe they're all interconnected, and they're all overwhelming. In 2019, in front of the United Nations, youth activist Greta Thunberg said, "Change is coming, whether we like it or not." Life, as we know it, cannot continue the way it's been going. The overlapping crises point to the truth of that statement. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, better known as the IPCC, stated that if we want a chance at a livable future, that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius requires rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes to all aspects of society. All aspects of society. This is not just about carbon emissions. This is about all aspects of society. And change is coming, whether we like it or not. So a reorientation of our systems, of our priorities, our values, our ways of being are in order. It's already happening, and there's so much work to do. This awareness can lead to a lot of fear, panic, hopelessness, helplessness, and of course, great grief. We can oftentimes feel too small to take on such huge overlapping systemic issues. And I commonly see two responses as a result of these hard truths. One response is the tendency to avoid, deny, or shut down to the truth. We hope someone else will fix it, and then we can keep going about our day-to-day. Despite these hard and painful truths, we know that the truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it. This is a quote from Flannery O'Connor. The second response, and the one that I'll focus on today, is that we can see the convergence of these multiple crises as an invitation to start co-creating new ways of being together. We can start transforming our lives to invite in more collaboration and more connectivity. We must act with courage because there is no one pathway marked ahead of us. Grace Lee Boggs said, "The time has come for us to reimagine everything." The time has come for us to reimagine everything. The first task on the path to this heart-centered revolution, as I'll call it, is to practice being with uncertainty. How can we begin befriending uncertainty? First, we acknowledge that certainty is an illusion. It's not real, it's culturally constructed. We're told from a young age that if we go to school, if we get the degree, if we land the job, and if we retire, that everything will work out well, and that is a life well lived. Certainty doesn't factor in illness, accidents, and now our social, political, and ecological breakdowns that are occurring all around us. We are much more nimble if we're able to go with the flow, to remain open to surprises, and to let go of expectations about the way things are supposed to be. Pema Chodron says, if you're invested in security and certainty, you're on the wrong planet. Let us arrive again here together. The truth is, life is always in flux. We could get hit by a bus today, struck by lightning, be a victim of a mass shooting tonight or tomorrow. We only have this present moment. Fearing a future that hasn't come yet is to give away our personal agency to live meaningful in the present moment. The future is not set. There are many unknowns about the earth and systems. We're living in a wild global experiment. And though things look pretty bad right now, this is not a reason to delay doing all that we can to start creating a truly just and life-centered way of being. We also have to stop waiting for the potential of a favorable outcome to get started on the meaningful work being asked of us in this time. When we start putting the puzzle pieces together, it's easy to come to the conclusion that we're fucked, so why bother doing anything? This is nihilism in the truest form. If you are alive right now, there is time to make meaning. There is time to regenerate ecosystems. There is time to minimize the harm that you're doing and to further connection. There's no more time to waste. How can each of us create more connection, more creativity, and more cooperation in our lives starting right now? Courage asks us to act without a guaranteed outcome. This is where the inner work meets the outer work. We at Good Grief Network start building emotional intelligence, or we start with building emotional intelligence, and by feeling our feelings. Being able to identify and manage our own emotions and being with the emotions of others. How many of us receive the messages that feelings are a weakness and we have to shut them down at all costs? Unless, of course, they're deemed positive. Research, in my own personal experience, has shown that we cannot selectively numb our feelings. Trust me on this. I've tried so hard. It doesn't work. We cannot selectively numb. If we want a full experience of the so-called positive feelings of being fully alive, we have to feel the fear, the rage, the grief, all of the heavy and painful feelings. Many of us have the belief that if we let in the fear or the rage or the grief, that we'll be overcome and overwhelmed by them. This is also not true. No feeling is final. They don't stay forever. Feelings are transitory by nature. If we allow them some space, if we try to name them, if we try to see where in our body there's a sensation associated with that feeling, it will pass. It will move. You'll be open to feeling something else. If you avoid or stuff that feeling because it's unpleasant or uncomfortable, it gets stored in the body. You do this over and over again. Over time, it'll result in avoidance and denial and lead to clinical anxiety and depression. Feelings are data points. They're information, and if we can learn to recognize them, to feel them, to process them, we might open to a depth, a maturity, a wisdom. What is this feeling telling me? What's on the other side of this feeling? If we feel our feelings, they become less overwhelming when they arise again. We don't just feel them once and then we're cured. Feelings like grief, fear, hopelessness, despair, and rage come back again and again and again. And we can greet them when they come as an old friend and say, oh, fear's here, or grief, or rage, I recognize this feeling. I know what it's like to feel this feeling. I can sit with this feeling and I can move it. Again, it's hard to be a thinking and feeling person in today's world, and we can use our feelings to connect with each other, but only if we're not scared of them, only if we don't shut them down. We cannot sit with other people with their feelings if we cannot learn to be with our own. There's an impulse to fix when someone is actively emoting. We minimize their experience instead of just being there and just listening. Listening is a practice. It's an art. We can get better at it over time. If you feel an impulse to fix, to problem solve the next time someone is expressing emotion, try to be still. Try to listen. You don't have to do or say anything. You just have to be there. This is the way to authentic connection. In Good Grief Network spaces, we often say, be with, don't fix. Culturally, we often try to rush into fixing because being in pain or in fear or uncertainty is really uncomfortable. This is true for our own experience of our feelings and also witnessing the painful feelings in others. Our inability to endure discomfort can be terribly problematic. What if the fixing, either individually or collective, is an attempt to avoid the painful realities? What if that causes more harm than good? What if our rush to fix, to try to move out of that discomfort, causes more harm than it does good? What if it causes further disconnection? We at Good Grief Network believe there is something to be learned in the grief, in the anger, in the despair. If you're new to feeling, it can be really overwhelming. As an adult child of alcoholics, I had to relearn how to feel, how to be vulnerable, and how to endure discomfort without rushing to solve it, without avoiding it. So now I'm going to share some tools and techniques to help you discharge powerful feelings if they feel like they're becoming too overwhelming. We do a lot of grounding exercises in Good Grief Network. One that we recommend all the time to everyone is either a meditation or a mindfulness practice. And it's hard to start a meditation or a mindfulness practice if you haven't been doing one for a long time. It almost feels like you're not guaranteed results fast enough. And so oftentimes we'll want to quit. Meditation and mindfulness has been hard for me, but I know that it's more of a slow internal transformation. What I've done, because meditation or a mindfulness practice has been really hard for me personally, is that I let my feelings catch up with me. So I create some space in my day where I'm alone, I'm not distracted, I breathe. I see if there's any feelings that are welling up, what wants to be felt. I allow those feelings some space. I breathe again. I don't judge the feeling. I don't create a story around the feeling. I just feel the feeling. And it's not always pleasant, but I know it won't last forever. So then I breathe. I let the feeling go, and I see if another feeling needs to be felt. I do the same thing again. I breathe. I try to name the feeling. I don't judge the feeling. I don't create a story about the feeling. I just feel it, and then it moves, and then I breathe. You can practice this practice for a few minutes at a time. Breathing exercises are another way to help regulate your emotions. They're great grounding practices. You can do that long exhale, the power exhale that we did at the beginning of the talk. Or you can practice 4-7-8 breathing developed by Dr. Andrew Weil. This one's my personal favorite. It's great for anxiety and overwhelm. This practice is where you inhale for a count of 4, you hold your breath for a count of 7, and you exhale for a count of 8. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. And this practice can be done for a few minutes at a time. Another way to find grounding when you feel really overwhelmed is to focus on gratitude, awe, and beauty. In a talk the other day, Terry Tempest Williams said that beauty is grace, and grace points to wholeness. In a fragmented, disconnected world, beauty and awe remind us that we are part of the whole. We're connected to everything. We at Good Grief Network also recommend a journaling practice. When you're writing, notice what wants to come onto the page. Are there any feelings arising in you? Can you capture them? Can you write them down? What is it like when you reflect on your feelings as you write? We also talk a lot about body movement in Good Grief. If my wife Amy were here, she would tell you all about her dance practice. She would tell you that she dances 80 minutes a day and how everyone is really a dancer. And it's just that most of us have been shamed out of it. Amy would say how dancing is really just listening to your body and finding freedom and being comfortable with who you are and the body that you live in. And she would tell you that you don't need a gym membership to dance. You can dance right in your room, right in your living room. Body movement more generally is huge for moving feelings. Running, walking, yoga, shoulder circles. It all helps. We also recommend spending time out of doors. When we're really overwhelmed with feeling, we don't trust ourselves to hold that feeling, and maybe we don't trust others to hold that feeling, but nature can hold those heavy and painful feelings. Even if it feels like no one else can support you, a river, a tree, a mountain, some dirt, all of those things can hold you. We also recommend that you start minimizing doom scrolling, your exposure to news and social media. Adrienne Marie Brown teaches that our attention is the most valuable resource that we have. Our emotions are manipulated by the media. The news and social media are businesses. They make money by controlling your attention and your emotions. Limit your interaction with the screen. Notice if you're trying to use it to numb out. Another way to help move some of your feelings is to connect with trusted people. Do you have a friend, a partner, a sibling, a parent, a therapist? Do you have someone who can support you, who you can be honest and raw with? We also want to recommend to spend time with animals and children. Animals and children are great at being present in the moment, and they're always looking at new perspectives. They look at things differently than we as adults do. And then, of course, we have to rewild ourselves. I invite you to consider for a moment the stories that you carry with you from the culture that we live in. Some of these stories involve our inability to be with discomfort and uncertainty, or the systemic oppression of BIPOC and LGBTQIA communities. What are your cultural stories surrounding death or vaccines? What about politics? How do these stories that live in you keep you from seeing reality? How do they cloud your perceptions? The dominant culture in the Western world has some really toxic, disconnecting messages about racism, speciesism, body image, queerness, meritocracy, and overconsumption, to name a few. Imagine for a moment, who are you at your core before the culture told you who to be? Were you an artist? Were you a dancer? Were you a storyteller or a rock collector? Did you howl at the moon or skip in public? Domestication is full of rules about how to be in relationship with the culture and with each other. But many of these rules aren't serving us and the larger vision of reconnection. In addition to limitations placed on our wild, intuitive selves by the culture, we often fall prey to our biases and limitations of our own perception. It's normal and natural to make mistakes, to be off in our perception of reality. Our brains are wired to take shortcuts. Our brains are wired for groupthink. Our brains are wired to conform with our in-group, even if our in-group is wrong. And it starts with noticing, being aware of our own patterns, of our responses, of our feelings. And I'm here to tell you that you have permission to be wrong. We all do. We can all practice self-compassion, patience, and understanding, and extend that outwards with others. The more patience and understanding that we can offer towards ourselves and others, the more we can connect. As poet Mickey Scott Bay Jones says in an invitation to brave space, we have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. Many of our problems happen when we other people, human and non-human. This othering, this disconnection, it makes it easier to cause harm, to enact violence, or to witness violent acts and do nothing about it. In tumultuous times, we can minimize harm by offering compassion and patience. We can start creating connection and community instead of fear and hate. Think about a time that you were wrong. What did it feel like to be wrong? It didn't feel good, did it? We can come back to the reality that we're human animals that are limited by our own perceptions. We can hold ourselves with compassion. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. This allows us to grieve the harm that each of us has caused. This is an essential step towards the heart-centered revolution that we're trying to create. We're all harm doers in some form or other. Even if we have the best of intentions, we're faced with impossible choices constantly. Many of us fly, many of us eat meat, many of us use single-use plastics. We're taught to track our individual carbon use by fossil fuel companies like BP, and P.S., they emit way more carbon dioxide than anyone else in this room right now. We also come with prejudice and judgments towards others who we view as other. We perpetuate racism and sexism because that's the system we live in. The system we live in is racist and sexist. These systems live in us, and it's up to each of us to recognize when we're perpetuating harm. Just this morning, I was so pleased to see that the Climate Psychology Alliance put out their newsletter focusing on decolonizing ourselves. This is hard work, and it requires us to deconstruct the cultural narratives we carry with us. It's the work of undoing. Therapist and author Resmaa Menakem says, trauma in a person, decontextualized over time, looks like personality. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time, looks like family traits. And trauma in a people, decontextualized over time, looks like culture. If we have unresolved trauma on the individual level, we think that trauma's impact on our lives is us. It becomes normalized. I act a certain way because it's just how I am. Perhaps I act this way because I have unhealed trauma. If families have unresolved trauma, our familial traits become unquestioned. The impacts of trauma become normalized. It's just the way my family acts. For example, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was a concentration camp survivor. My mother has mental health and addiction issues. I have mental health issues. Our family trauma looked a lot like family traits because our intergenerational trauma hadn't been healed, and it had been passed from my grandmother to my mother to me. Our culture has tremendous trauma and perpetuates harm because of it. As we unpack the hard truth of the dominant culture systems that are created and uphold racism and othering in forms of colonization, slavery, imperialism, xenophobia, the current police brutality, how we treat asylum seekers at the border, we notice that this trauma becomes normalized. It's just the way it is. This means cultural trauma looks like culture. This means that we embody, we normalize our traumatized way of being. We forget to question them because it seems like it's what we've always done and it's what everyone else is doing. I'm going to read that Resmaa Menakem quote one more time and slower. Trauma in a person, decontextualized over time, looks like personality. Trauma in a family, decontextualized over time, looks like family traits. Trauma in a people, decontextualized over time looks like culture. We can heal these traumas. We can heal these divides. And it starts by questioning our assumptions about life, about our cultural norms, about who we other. We question what it means to be a thinking, feeling human alive at this time. We start looking inward to see the ways that this trauma and these systems of oppression live in us. We must do this undoing work. The time of exclusion is over. The future of humanity is dependent on collaboration and connection. As we become more aware of the ways in which we personally have caused harm, we must grieve the harm we've caused. And we begin looking for ways to live in greater alignment with our values. There is room for your grief. We have to make space for grief. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. This gives us permission to be messy humans together. When we're willing to show up as imperfect people trying to align our values and minimize harm, we can create community. Community is the foundation of Good Grief Network's programs. Creating community is key to the heart-centered revolution. We know that in community, changing our patterns of behavior is so much easier. We're social creatures, we're cooperative animals. Behavior change for individuals is hard. It's a whole lot easier if we're supported and encouraged in community. It's a whole lot easier if we know the community wants to change too. Community breeds courage and inspires emergence. One reason for this is that we know we don't have to do everything ourselves. We move out of our individualistic, alienating, every person for themselves mindset. And instead, I do my part, you do your part, and they'll do their part. In community, our isolation is reduced. We feel connected, like our work in the world matters. S. Kelly Harrell says, we don't heal in isolation, but in community. We know that connected people are healthier, more vibrant, more innovative. We also know that by sharing ideas through conversation, new ideas emerge in community. We level up together. One idea inspires another, which inspires another, which inspires another. And eventually, we've arrived at a place we never could have gotten to alone. We at Good Grief Network are creating communities of practice where we open up about our feelings, we deconstruct our cultural narratives, and we hold space for what can emerge. But this only works if we listen to each other, not listening to respond, but practicing deep listening, hearing each other, being courageous enough to be witnessed. Adrienne Marie Brown recently wrote, community is a place to practice and participate in care, attention, knowing and being known, being protected, having room to make mistakes and still belonging, to heal, to recover. Community feels responsible for each other. She writes, community is an accumulation of choices made every day, a set of growing practices. We can be together in times of grief, anger, despair. We can be together in the tension. We can live the questions together instead of rushing to solution making just for the sake of ending the discomfort. We can learn to care for each other, and we can heal together. Grace Lee Boggs said, the only way to survive is by taking care of one another. We're learning that people don't need a perfect interaction, a perfectly scripted talk. What we need is an authentic connection. We want to see each other and be seen. We can move past our aspirations of perfection, and instead, we invite you to show up as you are, to be seen, to be moved, and to feel connected. Can we create spaces for each of us to speak our truths, our fears, our hopelessness? Can we be witnessed in our messiness? Cheryl Richardson says that people start to heal the moment that they feel heard. And Terry Tempest Williams taught me right at the U that bearing witness is not a passive act, especially in times of uncertainty. So we know the previous ways are coming to a close. Change is coming, whether we like it or not. And the new ways of being are created right now. They're being created right now. How can each of us best contribute to this transformation? Bayo Akamolafe often shares a nugget of wisdom from Nigeria. He says, times are urgent. Let us slow down. How can we slow down and prevent the impulse to rush to solutions in time of panic, frenzy, and discomfort? Bayo Akamolafe also says, the idea of slowing down is not about getting the answers. It's about questioning our questions. And Adrienne Marie Brown suggests that we have to practice something new, ask different questions, access again our curiosity about each other as a species. How do we get the questions? How do we get to the questions that cultivate more connection and more meaning? What helps contribute to the healing of the world, to each other, and to ourselves? As I wind down my talk today, I have a few invitations to leave you with. As you start envisioning ways to bring the heart-centered revolution into reality, I invite you to keep these in mind. Stay soft when you want to harden. Stay open when there's an impulse to constrict. Be gentle with yourself and each other. Question your questions. Stay open to surprises. Make time for celebration and play. And finally, imagine, just imagine what a truly just and life-centered future could look like, and start moving toward that vision. I'm going to say that one more time. Imagine what a truly just and life-centered future can look like. And right now, start moving toward that vision. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, LaUra. Just taking some time to sit with everything that you said. I think there was a lot of wisdom in your words. While I'm doing that, I want to invite all the attendees to please, if you have any questions, hop in the Q&A box down at the bottom. We're happy to answer your questions as best we can. Yeah.
Not all at once.
Yeah, we got one. So this is a good one, actually. So what can people expect from a good grief meeting? Are there patterns you observe from sitting in a circle with so many folks?
Yeah, definitely. So everyone is different because it depends on the people in the circle. What you can expect is that they're modeled after a typical 12-step program like AA or Adult Children of Alcoholics. And so we have captured their ritualistic part of the meeting. So we start with an intro, we have a closing, we actually now end all of our meetings with a poem. And in between, we create space to share. So a Good Grief Network meeting has 10 steps. We do one step a week. So every step or every week, there's a different topic that we discuss. And we don't actually chat with each other. It's more of a sharing space where we practice active listening. So that's what you can expect from a Good Grief meeting. We go very deep because it's a chance for us to speak from our heart and know that we're not going to be criticized or judged for what we're saying. And are there patterns that I've observed? There are so many patterns. One is that the reduction in isolation is huge for people. Like we're all sitting with these fears and the hopelessness and the dread, and we don't know where to put it. And you come into these meetings and you have a space where you can at least announce, I feel scared, I feel hopeless, I'm worried about the future. that eases a lot of the tension. It eases a lot of your own alarm and your own anxiety. And so that's one main pattern that I see. And then in addition to that, there's the whole arc where you put people in a room and they're strangers. And about week 4 or 5, you start to see them sort of congeal and really come into that community. And they start to look forward to seeing each other again. They say, oh, Emerson's here again. I love Emerson. This is so great. So then the community aspect becomes a big part of it too, is you get to feel really comfortable with everybody. And by the time you're at step 10, which is reinvest into meaningful efforts, we start wanting to figure out, what does a meaningful world look like? What does a life-centered world look like?
Perfect. We have questions coming in now. So another question from an attendee is, how can folks support your work at the Good Grief Network? What resources do you need, and how can we collectively elevate your work?
That's a great question. Amy and I have a Patreon, so you can go and support us on Patreon. This is a monthly donation-based, subscription-based model. We are a 501c3, so you can donate, and definitely we would appreciate that. I think the best way to become really involved with Good Grief Network is to come to our meetings and see what they're like and see what sort of transformation you can have while in one of these meetings. I think I'll pause there, and buy our book when it comes out next year.
I'm going to. Another great question is, and this one hits very close to me, has the topic of becoming a parent or whether or not to become pregnant been discussed at a Good Grief meeting?
Yes, a lot. I am not a parent myself, but there are a lot of folks who come as concerned parents, and there are a lot of folks who come with their grief and their worry and their alarm about whether or not to parent in these times. Just yesterday, we started a new group for parents, a 10-step program based it's facilitated by parents for parents, to hold that space for people who are concerned about these types of things. Our initiative, Good Grief Network, is very small despite being a worldwide movement. And so we haven't been able to do a lot of affinity groups. This is one of our first. And so we're really excited that as we grow and as we train more facilitators, we're going to be able to offer more affinity groups to have discussions about, specifically for folks who are worried or concerned about entering into the parenting journey, for LGBTQIA folks, like all these demographics that want to meet with their demographics. We'd love to provide that service moving forward.
All right, we have another great question. It has a little bit of context behind it. The attendee says, sometimes I think my peers and I struggle to summon the energy to fight for just climate action without becoming completely numb to the crisis at hand. So how do we work for a just and sustainable future while also remaining open and feeling the pains of the climate crisis?
The first and probably the easiest and the most important thing to do is to talk about it. Don't keep those concerns to yourself. I can guarantee you that if you're feeling that the other people that you're working with feel it too. That's the single most important thing to do, because sometimes we sort of get overwhelmed and think we're the only ones feeling it, when in reality, I host groups all the time from people all over the world that are feeling it too. And once we remove that sort of stigma about feeling maybe hopeless or despair or even tired, like tired is a big thing that comes up too, is like the problem seems so big. And I can guarantee you that rest is important. Rest and taking a break and sort of unplugging from the crisis for a little bit, going for a walk, spending time near a river, playing with, again, kids and dogs, journaling, using some of those practices, and then plugging back into the work. But you have to rest and you have to talk to other people about these kinds of things.
All right, so this one's a bit more straightforward. Where do you have the meetings?
Well, the meeting started in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they were held there for the first year. They have moved online. We host them on Zoom, kind of in the situation that we're in now. And once we get some funding and are able to grow our initiative, we would love to see these groups popping up regionally. We would love to have one in Denver, in Salt Lake, in LA, and Northern California, in a bunch of places all over the world. We would love these little pockets of meetings to be happening, but right now they're all digital, especially because of the pandemic.
All right, so This one says, I heard you have a book coming out, question mark. Any more information on when the pre-orders will be?
That question's from my sister. I do have a book coming out. Amy and I are writing it with Chelsea Buckley, and it's still in the process of being created. So we expect that publication will be probably fall of 2022, and it'll be through Shambhala Publications. So we don't have any information about pre-orders, but follow us on social media, follow our email list, and I can guarantee you, you will have that information.
And just so everybody knows, that's Good Grief Network on Facebook and social media.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Right. So next question, how would you recommend that faculty incorporate this into their classrooms when teaching about climate?
This is a huge question, especially as an environmental studies student and an environmental humanities student. I chose to look at these problems. I chose to study them. The single most important thing I think that faculty or teachers can do is be vulnerable, hold some space for the fact that these realities, these environmental, these social, these political realities take an emotional toll on us. As faculty, can you include some breathing techniques? Like I taught 2 of them, you know, in this hour-long talk. Like prepare your students, acknowledge the emotional toll it takes, and then let them know that they're not alone. Maybe form little discussion groups so that they can talk to each other, because these things are overwhelming. And what makes them more overwhelming is when we think we're alone in facing them. Those are my suggestions. Sarah Jaquette Ray and Jennifer Atkinson are 2 professors that are trying to really build awareness about how to bring this information into classrooms.
Great question. All right, another one coming up. Hi, LaUra, wonderful talk. Thank you. Are you able to stay in touch with the previous Good Grief Network participants? If so, do you hear back from folks who moved to action on the issues you discussed? Is your work leading people to get engaged once they have learned how to deal with their own overwhelming feelings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm thinking that what we try to teach in Good Grief Network is that meaningful action is really individual or specific to the individual. And so my meaningful action might not look like Emerson's. Maybe Emerson's action is really his reinvestment in parenting, so he's not projecting a bunch of crisis and fear onto his child. Maybe mine is writing or public speaking. And so what we do try to keep in touch with a lot of our past participants. At this point, Amy and I have done 20 or so groups, so the numbers add up very, very quickly. But we try, what the big global goal is to connect everyone and have everyone talking to each other and cross-pollinating ideas, because I can guarantee you I don't have all the answers. I can guarantee you Amy doesn't have all the answers, but I can also guarantee that if we put Amy and me in a room with 15 other people, we will have all learned something. And so the goal here is to keep the community connected and really build community so we can create and emerge new ideas that haven't been in existence yet, or maybe they just need to be rethought.
Awesome. So another one coming up. You highlighted the importance of finding the courage to act without a certain outcome. Can you talk more about finding the courage in ourselves and then helping others to find it?
Yeah, I think courage is a practice. I think we practice courage and we do it by just doing it. How I find my courage is I try to really sit, I try to discern with what's important. And then if it seems important, and even if I have resistance, then I try to act on whatever it is that I'm trying to do. So I suppose I'm saying that there's a quote that says, courage isn't the absence of fear, it is doing the thing even though there's fear present. And so how you start to find more courage is you find something worth being courageous for. And what I've also seen is that courage is really contagious. If I act courageously and somebody witnesses that, the ripples of my courage go really far and it inspires somebody else to be really courageous.
Cool. On courage, there's the other question, really kind of very similar. How do you stay tuned into the climate crisis and news while not getting sucked into that eternal scroll?
I am guilty of being sucked into that eternal scroll. So Do as I say and not as I do. Honestly, really, like, how much climate news do you need to know before you know that the situation is an emergency and that it's dire? You know, you don't have to read every article. You don't have to read every report. You don't have to sort of, like, what happens in our minds is we think, okay, we're fucked. Like, there's something really bad happening. And then we go and read an article like, yeah, we're definitely fucked. Then you read another article, yeah, definitely, definitely. Like, at some point you're just like, okay, I see the reality. It's pretty painful. Maybe I'm going to sit with those emotions. This this idea that we have to keep going, that we have to keep ingesting media to like stay up on the top news, I think is almost an escape from sitting with the harsh reality of the problems that we're facing. I think if we can see that this eternal scroll, and again, I'm guilty of this, if we can see this eternal scroll as sort of like trying to validate, like it's almost like we want to prove how bad it is. But I don't think we have to do that. I think what we're being called to do is just slow down and sit with the pain of how bad it is, and then see what happens on the other side once we slow down enough and unplug and sit with it.
Right. Got another question. And this is a bit more practically focused. So how can we speak up about being more eco-friendly in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that it starts with this courage, this notion of courage. You know, in the workplace, we can feel a lot of conflicting feelings, like why don't we want to speak up? Why don't we feel open enough to speak up about this? So maybe it's easiest to start about one practical thing we can focus on. Like I worked at a brewery here in town and they were still using styrofoam. And I think that's insane that in this day and age, we're still using styrofoam. And so I spoke to the manager and I said, what is it, like 10 cents more per container if you just use one of the, like, I don't know what, biodegradable ones? And my conversation just entering into it had their whole organization change from styrofoam to the biodegradable containers. And so I suppose that my advice to you is to figure out something tangible. Use your courage, figure out something tangible that can change, and use that as an entry point into conversation.
I see there's one question in the chat too from Christina. I wanted to make sure that you got this before you wrap up. It takes you right back to the beginning. She says, how did the Good Grief Network come out of your graduate studies?
That's a great question. And it is full circle, isn't it? Okay, so I had some really great professors. Actually, Emerson and I were a year apart in the EH program. We had some really great professors, and we looked really, really hard into the severity of the predicaments. We read a lot of things. We talked about a lot of these things. And I realized, because I am someone with intergenerational trauma, I'm someone who has anxiety and depression, that if I wanted to look at these problems and not break down, that I was going to have to do some work. I was going to have to fortify myself internally. So my thesis became an exploration of interviewing activists and teachers and writers and people who wanted to look at the problem head on and see what kind of resilience strategies they were employing. And then I did my own independent research. How do we build personal resilience? What types of things do we use to fortify ourselves? And then my thesis project ended up being a creative nonfiction project where I was comparing my situation as one single human being in the world to the collective problems, and how my traumatic life and childhood really it's not a single thing that happened. It happens everywhere. They're collective problems. It's about the way that we other people. It's about the way that we shut down people. It's about the way that we don't recognize authenticity and feelings, and how we kind of look away from trauma. And so through that whole process, I ended up designing sort of 9 ways that we can reinforce ourselves so that we can build personal resilience. And then I sat on that for a little while. I defended my thesis, I graduated, I worked for a small nonprofit in Utah. And then after working for the small environmental nonprofit in Utah, I saw that we would try to do really great work and it would be shut down, and we'd try to do really great work and it would be shut down, and we'd like try to have conversation about climate change, and people didn't want to have that. And so eventually I asked Amy, the GGN co-founder and my wife, if she would help me bring this program into practice, if she would help me bring it to life, because I knew that I needed to practice these tools. And I thought that maybe if I needed some help, that community members also needed help. So we started in Salt Lake, meeting in person. We did 2 rounds there. And then once we ran through one 9-step program, we realized that we were missing a conversation about death. So we added a 10th step about honoring our own mortality. And since then, it's been a 10-step program. And as I mentioned, it's mostly online right now, but our hope is to get right back into local communities and start building that personal resilience, that community resilience. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, great questions all around. We only have a few minutes left, and I've been thinking on a question for a second. So I'd love for you to talk about sort of the importance of joy and laughter in all these practices.
Yeah, thank you, Emerson. I think we take ourselves too seriously. You know, like even preparing for the talk, I'm like, I gotta do it this way. I gotta sound this way. But I think in reality, the real meaning, the real joy of life is when we're able to connect and have fun together, when we're able to play. You know, like none of us are going to make it out of this life alive. And so if we just like buckle down and think about how bad things are right now and how they'll potentially get worse, like we're selling ourselves short in the present moment to experience things like joy and play. And then what my wife and I talk about a lot is actually it's through play that we open to new imaginations, or to our imagination, which creates new ideas. And so if we're always taking on this pressure, the weight of the world, it really restricts us if we're trying to come up with new, novel, nuanced ideas. And so I would say that joy and play and that sort of freeing ourselves of like the burden of being alive today is a tension that we have to come back to. You know, we can't always be in that serious realm. We have to find ways to play. We have to find ways to connect and to create joy. That's a great question, Emerson.
So I don't see any other questions popping up. I want to sort of echo what everybody said in the chat and Q&A before all their questions. This was amazing, LaUra. We really thank you for bringing this presence to the University of Utah as we celebrate Earth Week and try to, you know, make it feel like a community, make it feel like anybody who's, you know, supporting sustainability and thinking about climate change at the university is really has a space to share that. And I'm going to say I definitely do. And I'm pretty sure the Sustainability Office really appreciates your presence and your time and your thoughtfulness. I also just want to thank sort of the Good Grief Network, and for all of you who are interested, look it up, support them. They're doing great work. It's just been amazing for me personally, just because I've known you for such a long time, LaUra, to watch this whole thing become a movement, and it's really potent and powerful, and it's actually really accessible too. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you all.
Yeah,
Happy Earth Week, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emerson. Thank you, the Sustainability Office. You guys are great. Thank you.
LaUra.